Hello, I'm Radim Malinic. I'm a designer and author, and this is my love letter to Marshall.
Your brand plus an emotional connection with your audience equals success. This podcast explores that middle part. I'm Sam, a brand designer and your host. In each episode, I invite a guest to pick their favourite brand and unpack why it means so much. As they share, we learn what makes audiences tick, not with strategy or theory, but through that undeniable proof of successful branding, emotion.
I encountered Marshall at potentially the most poignant time of my life when I was a teenager. And I was pretty much, I think, an early teenager. And I discovered the world of rock and metal and death metal and heavy metal and pretty much anything with guitars that goes big and strong. And I remember going to gigs from quite a young age. And my first gig I've ever seen was Motorhead, which I'm so happy that I can say, it was Motorhead and Lemmy and the other guy, I can't remember which guitarist was playing at that time. I remember stepping into this sports arena when they were playing. They were playing my home time in Czech Republic. Somehow, there was like an arena for 5,000 or 6,000 people, and they were, they sold it out. So this is like sort of early 90s. And I remember the wall of Marshall speakers. I'm like, what is that? And why do you need that many? And like, what's going on? And that was the beginning of my sort of partial beginning of my musical sort of, I wouldn't call it career, but my musical explorations, because I got absolutely mesmerized by, heavy music, with everything that came with him, the tribalism, the visual side, from, grown men embroidering logos to their denim jackets. It was amazing, like how we now try to convince people to sort of, to buy into our brands. We invent brands, we invent brand stories. Whereas, you had, some five dudes from, Tampa, Florida forming a band, releasing records. And then you have millions of people around the world embroidering their logo into their jackets and buying, t-shirts and albums and following the gigs, because that's brand equity, that's brand following. And that's kind of like, it's a first-hand experience. Because, if you want someone to buy into your startup these days, you kind of really have to push the message and write articles and that kind of stuff. Whereas this was firsthand, speaking from one soul to another. So that was my first encounter with Marshall. And then somehow, going to local gigs, people keep cropping up on stage with Marshall. And it's such iconic design of the amp, the head amp and the speaker cabinet, that you can't miss it. Like it's so well branded that it stands there proud, like another member of the band.
And were you a bassist in bands at this point in time, or was that later?
I was beginning to be a bassist in bands. Yeah, I remember forming my band when I was 13 or 14. I think this is a loose term band and loose term for a bassist, because it was all about noise. You can make, quite a lot of angry noise, make sound like, some form of music. And somehow I'm trying to remember like how I was able to actually buy what I believe was a knockoff head and a speaker cabinet, with some help from part-time sort of summer jobs and that kind of stuff. And I remember having that, and I was just like so amazed how it sounded. Like it was warm because it's got, these analog lamps in the back of the head. So yeah, I was forming a band with a few of my friends, played the first gig when I was 15. And it kind of snowballed from there because I was kind of ambitious. My first band, we had screen printed T-shirts with our sort of illegible logo, and that already made us sound look and sound different, even though we were absolute garbage. But you gotta go from that visual aesthetic because, I mean, you got so many other prominent sort of music instrument brands, and all you have to do is just to have a kind of just a white logo on a black T-shirt, and you kind of started having a brand following pretty much straight from there too. So yeah, music was an integral part of my life actively till I was about 16, 17, 18. But then I went through that, I think from about age of 16, I was a DJ as well, which was something that gave me even a bigger pleasure of discovering more and more sort of wider genres of music, because with my sort of career path, I'm very non-linear. I'm very much explorer of everything that look and sounds and tastes good. So that was my story.
And tell me, was Marshall a big part of your kind of journey to move to the UK? Because I know you moved to the UK at the turn of the millennium.
I have to be honest, I kind of I parted with Marshall for a short while because one of the reasons why I moved to the UK was more of electronic scene. So like labels like Ninja Tune and Metalheads and Moving Shadow, that kind of stuff. So I was very much through my DJ pursuits was discovering other forms of music that were slightly sort of away from that beautiful guitar sound, but that still didn't mean that I kind of given up on that. So Marshall wasn't fully instrumental in that part, but it was part of the heritage. Like, okay, I moved to the UK because of music scene. Like, first and foremost, it was music. I wanted to be closer to the language and to the music, and to be able to go to gigs pretty much every night of the week and weekends, and go to club nights and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was always nice to see the proper tech coming up, and it was also nice to be actually able to go to a guitar store and pretend that you're gonna buy a lot of expensive gear so they can let you play in that little sort of studio room for hours and hours. And I'm guilty of that, doing it very often.
You have to be careful with that, don't you? You have to sort of see how long you can string it out before they realize you're not going to buy anything.
When they say, buy this sort of £2,000 guitar, you're like, no, but I'm going to buy a plectrum for £2.
Yeah. What emotions does Marshall evoke for you when you just think about it? What comes to your heart?
I mean, it speaks to my soul. I mean, it's kind of those brands that didn't happen in a boardroom, and I love the history of like how I think they were doing. How they were doing the sort of franchise for Fender at first, and then they had a complaints for people like Pete Townsend saying, the stuff is not loud enough. Can you make louder speakers? And so they were making 100-watt speakers and amplifiers and systems for people to actually get a bigger sound, and that's what made them famous. And I just love the fact that it's all about how the music makes you feel, because I do loads of conversations about branding and creativity, and sometimes people say like, so what was it like being in a band? And you kind of think like, it's a little bit like being in a design studio, apart from the fact that what you create with your friends or sometimes enemies, it's a compromise. Basically, you have to come up with an idea that people will associate with, people will fall in love with, and there's nothing sort of more magical than coming up with a new riff. It's got a groove. It makes you feel something. You play that groove over and over again until you work out the next phase, and it's just like, so it's kind of beautifully meditative and rewarding process that when you support it, when you got decent gear. Yeah, I've got such fond memories of my head, Marshall head and cabinet, because it kind of was like we used to say like, it moves your trousers. Like when you play, it moves your trousers. Like everything sort of it's vibing, buzzing, and yeah, the emotion is just pure excitement, like absolutely pure excitement, because it's unlike anything else in life.
You mentioned that wall of amps when you went to see that gig, and just seeing that white logo on the black background. What is Marshall doing visually that is so significant and so exciting for you?
I think it's a bit like a Coca-Cola thing, isn't it? Like, they haven't really changed logos. I mean, there was a few different iterations, but however I've been trying to find that history of that logo, but I've not been able to do so. To find where it came from, who did it, because we've got like things like Nike sort of well documented where the swoosh came from, and how it wasn't exactly the one they wanted it at first. With Marshall, it's the pure simplicity. Like, when you think about the actual guitar equipment, it hasn't fundamentally changed. It's just evolved to be a little bit better. So just like that Coca-Cola logo, it's just only evolved to be as iconic as it is now. And it's just beautiful because it feels hand drawn. The gear was, the arms used to be handmade. And it, like, the reason why it came about is because it was an answer to a problem. It just can't, visual identity is just so simple. And I just love how the brand has evolved into what you mentioned, like the Bluetooth speakers and headphones and all sorts of collaborations, that it has its own entity, has its own sort of visual equity, but it's always true to the legacy, which sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it feels like with the fast sort of moving consumerism, and somebody called it yesterday the snackable era, that you need to sort of evolve and change and adapt, and because things are changing. But when you got something in a way so simple, like you plug in a guitar, you play the music, the Fender logo hasn't changed much, PV, Tama, Zillion, like, I know those brands haven't really changed their logos because they've got so much hardcore following that you don't have to do it. You're just gonna evolve and make things just better quality, more robust and more in line with current time. So I think what they've done with the whole simplicity of the scheme is fantastic, because it's not, it doesn't try to be a trendy sort of uncle. It's just like, look, this is who we've been for the last, I don't know, 50 odd years, and this is who we are going forward. And I think I just love that, because there's no fussiness, there's no fussiness, because the gear does the talking, and you almost need a minimal design system around it, which I think is fantastic.
What have they done that surprised you over the years?
I think I'm glad they haven't lost their way. I think what surprised me, one thing that surprised me is that they tried to launch a phone, which was kind of like an average phone, but very interesting sort of recording gadget. That surprised me. But I think I think it was more like a sort of the hindsight, like the surprise of a hindsight, that they haven't got it wrong. Like, every turn the brand has taken was really good. And before we started recording, I showed you one of the Bluetooth speakers I've got, and I've got a Marshall headphone in my ear. So I think buying a Marshall t-shirt is potentially the next thing I need to do. But I think they've stayed true, because sometimes you get new brands, even Windows used to try to do like MP3 players and headphones and that kind of thing. But when you come in as a music brand with such a sort of heritage of visual legacy, the product design and sort of solid brand equity, like what they've created always felt on brand. And that surprised me nicely, because sometimes, some Muppet CEO turns up, they used to work for, Pepsi or whatever, and will try to change things. And I think evolving without losing the authentic touch is a real skill, especially at this day and age, because, you've seen a lot of brands try to, rebrand hastily, then backpedaling really fast, like the example of Gap, for example, when they had that square logo, changing it for whatever Helvetica it was or something, and then pretending like it never happened. And I understand that we need to evolve, but the way the Marshall has done it, in a way, is just that there was more innovation and sort of elegance in evolution rather than wholesale changes. And I think there's a lot of people who are very much thankful for them to keeping it that way, because it just looks beautiful.
just a quick one to ask you for a small favour that you can do right now. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, I invite you to hit subscribe or hit follow, whatever it looks like on your podcast player. And that just means that you'll see new episodes of Branding Love Letters as they come out. If you have already subscribed to this podcast, here's what you can do right now. I invite you to leave a rating, a star rating, or leave a review, a short review. That just makes a huge difference to what I can do with this podcast, the stories that I can tell, and the insights that we can gain into emotional connections to branding. Thank you very much. Back to the interview. I think it's really interesting because when you showed me those Bluetooth headphones on the Zoom before we started recording, because it's just that black with the white, hand lettering on it, it kind of feels weirdly timeless, like a weird kind of sense of this could have existed 60 years ago. And I think that's testament, isn't it, to the depth and the lineage of this brand, that actually modern as the equipment may be, it feels part of a story. It feels part of a lineage, I think is the best word that I could say. Would you echo that? Does that feel kind of true?
100%. Yeah, I think you're working with a very limited number of visual ingredients, and that's what makes it really interesting, because even the casing on the AirPods is kind of like a faux leather. I mean, it's plastic, but it's sort of, it mimics the original texture of the guitar heads, like the amp heads. And it's just the simple stuff, they don't have to invent stuff, that it's come from a place with, that started with a soul and heart, and you just reuse those things and apply them to modern casing and modern product design. Even their Bluetooth speakers, they pretty much mimic what the regular amps look like and what they do, and it's I feel maybe because of my sort of the teenage years link up, I think it makes me feel something. It kind of takes me back and reminds me of good times. It obviously reminds me of some bad times, because no one's adolescence is easy, but there is something so beautifully soulful about this. So yeah, I fully agree. Absolutely agree.
Have there been any times where it's been more difficult to love Marshall?
No. I mean, there was never a controversy. I mean, I think when I look back at it, and I told you in our sort of initial conversation that I was a big fan of Marshall for a very long time, and then I get sort of sidetracked like everybody else. Our interest changes and our sort of consumption of brands and things change. So I kind of took a time out because I didn't necessarily, there was no sort of products that I needed at the time, because even though once upon a time I used to spend 8 hours playing a guitar because I didn't exactly have a full-time job, so I used to play more and I used to be more into music, whereas now I do other things, and I've got multiple businesses, and I'm a dad and a couple of kids and all sorts of things to do. I've come back to the brand through the products that fit into my lifestyle now. And with Marshall, I don't remember kind of anything, because I'm not sort of active user who would be sort of changing, combos or my amplifiers on sort of 5 or 6 year basis. I'm sure there were some products that potentially didn't work out for them, and something didn't go well. I know there's some employees who left the brand and started a new brand called Black Star, and I think it's called Black Star. I think their logo is just something really basic and kind of just like, why? You could have done everything and you did this. That means that potentially you left for the right reason. So yeah, I mean, we've got it's a pure love between me and Marshall, because there was never really anything that you would think, why why did you do that? So yeah, no, it's a beautiful story of what they've created, because yeah, it's only been one way forward.
And how would you describe them if someone had never heard of Marshall before? How would you kind of put it into just a few words to capture something of kind of what you have experienced personally through them?
I think they pride themselves on one word, and that's loud. Like it's been designed as a problem to a solution to a problem, which is like, other stuff is not loud. We need something louder. So I think that is the first and most encompassing word, which is loud. But I found them to be elegant. It's a beautifully tactile piece of kit. It's soulful. The sound is warm and kind of transcending. It actually pushes you to another place. As I was saying, to be making music with that behind me, obviously I never had a wall of Marshall, and I used to play bass in a band, but I had a guitar as well, and I sort of dabbled in all sorts of different bands. But even just that one big box and head on top of it, it just fills the room and makes you feel something. It makes you feel like, you're a ready-made rock star, even though you might suck as much as possible. And it's transcending. It's just like, it kind of gives you feeling that you can do whatever you want, that the world is your oyster. And yeah, it's always fun, like, because I think I may have mentioned it already, but like the wall of Marshall speakers, I think it's just sometimes just a beautiful sort of theater staging, because you don't need 900 or 1200 watts of guitar sound, because that would pretty much kill you. So it's always like some of the amps are switched on, but it's just that devotion when you think how musicians really associated with the brand and the product, that they made it like a front and center feature of the stages, and wanted to be with it. Because I'm thinking about how much you think of iconic musicians like Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page / Clapton. I mean, Zakk Wylde, one of my favorite guitarists. Then you got Angus Young from AC/DC. I feel excited just even saying their names, because that music comes from the soul. And I've mentioned about soul many times, but there was a great quote by Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses in his memoir. He said, "When the music's good, you want to break something." And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, for that, you just need a pure power and raw energy behind you, and something that just makes it sound good. So how would I describe them to anyone who hasn't had them in all of these ways? But it's loud. It connects with your soul, Yeah, amazing.
I love it. Well, Radim, I'd love to hear more about you, what you're up to at the moment, and where people can connect with the various different things you're doing, maybe some of the different books that you've released recently. Tell us where we can connect in with what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. So I am an author. You can find me on Instagram at radim.malinic or radimmalinic.co.uk, where you can find out more about my written work. I also run a branding and creative studio with focus on visual storytelling at brandnew.co.uk. But I try to kind of transcend everything that I've learned from the world of music into a creative world, because, as I mentioned, like, try to solve a creative problem is sometimes like being in a band. And you got egos, ambitions, insecurities, anxieties all mixed in together. So this is why I've recently started something that I call the 21st century designer's toolkit, which is books on how we can overcome the set elements, anxiety, insecurity, burnout, all of that stuff that comes with creative careers these days. And I've got a book called Creativity for Sale, which is about how to launch a creative service business. And I've got a book recently released at the same time, which is called Mindful Creative, which is how to create optimal conditions for creativity and navigate the highs and lows that come with it. And these books are very much connecting, because in a way, the way they're designed and the titles of the chapters are named is actually inspired by music, because when I was in my bands, no one wanted to write lyrics. No one wanted to do anything visual. So I was the guy who kind of like, okay, I'll make the posters for the gigs. I'll make the CD covers, and, I'll name the songs. And yeah, the reasons why my chapters are, for example, just the one word is because it's easy to fit it on a page, but also it's inspired by track names.
Well, I love it. And what I really appreciate about you, Radim, is that you transcend industries and art forms, and you're a designer, you're an author, you're a creative director, you're a podcaster. It's like creativity, you've talked about your musical love for music as well. That's kind of clearly part of it. And I just really appreciate that you're someone who is saying that actually creativity doesn't stay in one lane. Creativity is out there, and it crosses these disciplines. And it's just, it's really, really beautiful to see. So thanks for what you're doing. Keep doing it.
Thank you, Sam. I think there's a reminder that being linear can work as a one trajectory. I always used to show in my talks like this sort of one lane road versus the spaghetti junction, and it's like, it's not everything's for everyone, but when you look at the adaptability and that curiosity, it goes back to the story of this brand, and it goes to what we can do. Because sometimes people say, well, if I didn't pursue my side ideas, like my side hustles, whatever, so no side projects, I would have been potentially further on other career, and like I would have been potentially better at what I do right now, but maybe I got distracted. Whereas I see everything as an amazing way to actually add to your talent and to your toolkit and to your skill set, because that's where the magic happens. That's where interesting things happen. And it's something that doesn't produce regrets, because regret is just trying to sort of change the past. Whereas we learn from everything that we do, and it can add to our, future, or just sort of inform our future. And I think that's the best part of it. So,
love it. Well, finally, I would love to hear this love letter that you have written to Marshall.
Dear Marshall, thank you for being in my life. You've been one of the loves of my life and always will be. I'm grateful for all the loud memories, for all the drunken memories, for all the places that I've been thanks to you, meeting people that I never thought I would meet, forging friendships that I'd never forge, and giving me a reason to have something to talk about to strangers all around the world. Because if there's one thing that can always find you friends anywhere you are in the world, is to talk about music. And it's usually the one that, is heavy, loud, angry, soulful, and it's all been made possible partially because of you. So keep doing what you're doing. It's been incredible, and I hope to love you for many more years.
Well, Radim, thank you very, very much for letting us hear your branding love letter.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Branding Love Letters with me, Sam Thorogood. I'm a brand designer for startups, creators, charities, eco projects, and church plants. I'm on a mission. Equip these pioneering brands to bring others onto their journeys. If you're interested, you can discover more at www.pilgrimage.design. Oh, and big thank you to Thomas Thorogood for the music. Take it away, Tommy boy.